Hi, my friends. Welcome to the Deep State. Actually, to Deep Six, the Deep State. We're the anti-Deep State people. And welcome to my daily news summary. We had quite a lot of viewers last time. We had 30,000 while we were broadcasting and another 60,000 who tuned in later. Really very impressive, and thank you. Congress has been paying out of public money, your money and my money, taxpayer money, $15.2 million since 1995 to members of Congress, Senate and House, and senior staff who are accused of committing sexual harassment against their employees or against other people who come in their path. And we have paid that money. There's a special fund, a government fund that is established to pay those claims if they're adjudicated to be accurate or to be plausible, or if there's a standard of proof. And $15.2 million have been paid out in over 350 claims of sexual harassment. And Congress won't tell us the names of who got fined, of who, in whose name the payments were made. Let me be clear, they didn't pay a penny. The members of Congress who committed sexual harassment did it for free, even though the allegations were found to be serious enough to warrant payment to the victims. The victims were bound, as condition of the settlement, by an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement. And they can't, and Congress won't, release the names of the predators involved, even though they're on our payroll, not just as congressmen, but as sexual predators. Isn't that incredible? Congress won't release the names. A Democratic congresswoman from California raised a stink about it the other day, but she didn't mention the names, and she said she would not ask the victims to violate their non-disclosure agreements. Well, that's fine, but how about Congress violates it? How about Congress says, we will tell you, your elected representatives who committed these offenses, and we'll tell you who they are and against whom they were done. Even if they kept the names of the accusers quiet or secret, once those claims have been essentially adjudicated, there is no reason not to release the names of the perps. So go to this site, posted now. Is it on the site?
Jerry's going to be posting it. I'm not sure if it's up yet, but it will.
Or go to dickmorris.com, where it is also posted now, and sign a petition asking Congress to release the names of the perpetrators, the members of the House, the members of the Senate, who committed sexual harassment, for which we are paying the tab. Isn't that incredible? Can you believe that? They're paying it out. We elected these guys. We doubtless have re-elected them several times since then, and we're kept in the dark as to who they are. While in the meantime, Congress is outraged at Roy Moore and at others who are accused of similar offenses that have not yet been adjudicated. And yet the very people who are voting that way were the very people who themselves are guilty of the offense. Absolutely incredible. This is a new one, a new low even for Congress.
We have a question from Daniel Manley. What was the reasoning for this law? I understand that they want to protect themselves, but what is a legal argument for it, and did it pass on its own or under another bill?
No, it passed on its own, standalone legislation. And you know the answer to your question, who asked it?
Daniel Manner, I believe.
Daniel? I don't have
Manley.
the faintest idea. I can't conceive of a rationale for it. I can't think of it. I mean, it's absolutely crazy. And, I mean, that there would be a process to adjudicate these so that you're not in court with the long procedure, that's fine. But that we would pay for it, not them, I have no idea. And I can't even think of a rationale for it. I'm up the same stump you're up.
Well, Craig Corsini wants to know, why is Congress so corrupt?
Well, we vote for him. We elect him. The real answer to this is term limits and full disclosure. And Congress will never pass term limits on itself. It's constantly rejected it. There is a way we could impose term limits on them, which is to have a convention of the states. See, Congress gives, the Constitution specifies two methods of amending itself. One is the way that's been used, I think, 28 times so far, which is to have 2/3 of the House and the Senate, along with 3/4 of the states, agree to it, and then it's in the Constitution. But the other way completely bypasses Congress, which was the intent of the framers, to give you a way to amend the Constitution without asking the federal government, just asking the states who created the Constitution. And what happens then is that 2/3 of the state legislatures call for a convention, which is then held with separate delegates elected, and they then pass the amendments. And if 3/4 of the state legislatures then ratify the amendment, it goes into the Constitution without the approval of the House or the Senate or the President. No federal official plays a role in that, and that's the only way you're going to get term limits. I've been urging President Trump to embrace this and to make this part of his program. And I suspect that after this term is over, this session, and he's got some stuff passed and some stuff not, and his frustration with Congress has reached a boiling point, I think at that point he may adopt that suggestion, and this may be a topic that we're going to revisit later. Mark Levin, my friend, wrote a book called The Liberty Amendments, which are amendments he would like to see in the Constitution as a result of a convention of the states. Now, while we're revisiting all of these issues of sexual harassment and charges against our leaders, there was a very interesting piece by a woman named Michelle Goldberg, who I don't know, who wrote an op-ed in the New York Times. And as you know, the New York Times is pretty careful about what it publishes. It has to be sure that it's in sync with its editorial policy. So I was very surprised. The headline was, "I believe Juanita Broderick," which is quite something coming from a newspaper that has not given her the right time of day. Michelle writes, "Of the Clinton accusers, the one who haunts me is Broderick. The story she tells about Clinton recalls those we've heard about Weinstein. She claimed they had plans to meet in a hotel coffee shop, but at the last minute he asked to come up to her hotel room instead, where he raped her. 5 witnesses said she confided in them about the assault right after it happened. It's true that she denied the rape in an affidavit to Paula Jones's lawyer before changing her story when talking to federal investigators. But her explanation that she didn't want to go public, but couldn't lie to the FBI because that was a crime, makes sense. And I believe her, put simply. I believe her. And I do too. The MO that Clinton deployed in that, she said, was to bite her lower lip while he was raping her. And that same MO surfaced in the Jennifer Flowers depositions and in the accounts of a couple of other examples of sexual harassment by President Clinton. And in this case, it actually went over to the realm of rape. So I think it's important to revisit some of those allegations. In particular, the other one that I think merits it is that of Kathleen Willey. Kathleen Willey's story is that she went in to see Clinton in the Oval Office. She was a campaign volunteer. And that he backed her against the wall, he groped her, he kissed her, he fondled her, and she ran out of the office screaming. And Linda Tripp, who intercepted her, who worked there, confirms that story. And it certainly could be true and merits some significant investigation. Later, Kathleen recounted a story that she was jogging in the park the day before she was supposed to go in for a deposition on these charges. And a guy came running up beside her and said, "How's your cat?" and ran away. And when she came home, her cat was dead. And a few weeks later, when she was coming in for another deposition, what might have been the same guy came up jogging and said, "How are your children?" and gave their names and their ages. They were fine, but still, obviously, a threat. So these claims merit investigation, particularly in light of what's come out about people like Cosby and Weinstein and so on. Now, everybody's dumping on the establishment is saying Trump is a ham-handed guy without finesse, without a good sense of how to move ahead, and that he's failing in Congress. Well, I don't see that. I am very impressed with the political smarts on this guy's head. He just came up with a brilliant move. The tax cut bill is going through Congress. And in the tax cut bill, they're going to incur a deficit of $1.5 trillion more than previously estimated because of the tax cuts. And the issue is now, how do you pay for that? And by pay for it, you mean offsetting spending cuts that help finance the tax cut. And the Congressional Budget Office was asked by one of the opponents of Obamacare, how much money would we save if we no longer fine people for not having health insurance? Now that sounds oxymoronic. How do we save money by not collecting fines? But the answer is that by not making people buy health insurance, we decrease the number of people we have to subsidize through Obamacare. And in fact, the Congressional Budget Office agreed that we would save between $300 and $400 billion net of the fines we wouldn't collect. They're taken out already, which we could use for the tax cuts. And that's a big chunk of money, over almost a third of the $1.5 trillion we have to find. So after some pressure from conservatives, the leadership in the House and the Senate have agreed to put a provision in the tax cut repealing the individual mandate, repealing those fines. And they're going to get votes for it. They're going to pass it, I think, because the various members want their own special tax cuts, and they want to restore this deduction and restore that one. And to finance that, they have to come up with money. And this will give them a ready source of $400 billion that over 10 years that they could tap. Now, as I've explained, eliminating the individual mandate is the death blow for Obamacare. Because once that happens, the whole thing unravels very quickly. Because as long as you're not, in effect, drafting young, healthy people and making them buy health insurance they neither want nor need, and in most cases can't afford, once you stop that, the only people left in the pool are people who are old and people who are sicker. And when those people are covered, the rates go up because the policies are more expensive. And once you take the young people out of the field, the rates will be unchecked and will go up very high. And more young people and healthy people will refuse to pay that freight, and increasingly the only people left will be older and sicker people. And Obamacare can't afford that, and the insurance company is going to pull out of it, and it's going to crash and die very quickly, very soon. Now, you say, oh, that's horrible for the people who won't be able to afford it. But there's a very good answer to that. First of all, they will replace Obamacare with a program of some subsidy that will be available for people. And most importantly, there is a fund in Obamacare called PCIP, Pre-Existing Conditions Insurance Program, where 132,000 people get their insurance paid for by the feds because they are so sick. They're all under 65. It's not Medicare, but they are so sick and at the older end of that spectrum, and that they can't afford the premiums that the insurance company would need to charge to provide them with health insurance. And the subsidies are greater than those provided in Obamacare. That pool will still exist, and those revenues will still be there to cushion those people who are affected by it. But the rest of us will not have to be dragged into this Obamacare system, kicking and screaming, because the mandate will have been lifted. So Trump is going to kill two birds with one stone. He is actually going to pass the two key elements of his legislative program: eliminate Obamacare and cut taxes to get the economy moving. A 100% success rate. He's going to get them both done. And he's going to get them both done probably before the end of the year. So, hallelujah. And what skill, what amazing skill of the president to include that in this bill, which is a bill very few members, Republicans, can be seen not voting for.
Dick, Jim Denham asks, Rush Limbaugh said that the Senate intends to simultaneously restore subsidies to the insurance companies with repeal of the mandate. Is that true?
It sure is, and I hope that I have was one of the next things I'm going to talk about. And who said it?
Jim Denham.
Jim, you're on your toes. Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, there is a nefarious bill co-sponsored by Lamar Alexander, a rhino Republican from Tennessee, and Patty Murray, the Democratic senator from Washington State, that restores the subsidy to insurance companies that Trump is going to cancel by executive action as president. And there's question as to whether Trump can cancel it, but in any case, he wants to try. And this bill mandates those subsidies, which basically is a single-payer system. It's basically saying the federal government will pay all of the cost of insuring people, and it's a single-payer system being billed as a bailout to protect the sick people who are now covered by Obamacare. But as I explained, they would be protected anyway without this bill. And what they're doing is they're saying, okay, if you're going to reverse the individual mandate, the same unraveling process I just described is going to happen, and to protect Obamacare, we need to pass the Alexander Murray bill. And that's horrible. And the math of it is that you would get an overwhelming support, because all the Democrats would vote for it, and most of the rhinos would too. So you'd have a two-thirds majority in the Senate to be able to pass it. Our saving grace here is the House, which will never go along with that, because their goal is to kill Obamacare, not to prolong it. And when we get to nut-cutting time, which will probably be over Christmas, I'm going to be back to you and ask you to sign about 1,000 petitions on that, so that we don't rescue Obamacare from the jaws of death. We just let it get eaten and devoured. But it's premature, but good for you, Jim, for spotting it, and that issue is coming down the pike.
Anna Teal Strange asks, I'm still confused about the definition of the tax bracket term middle class.
Well, technically, it's people making enough so they pay taxes, which is about $30,000 a year, income taxes for a couple, and people who are not yet in the higher bracket, which is about $80,000 for a household income. So that would be the technical definition there. Now, lately in economics, they've split the middle class into middle class and working class. And the lower end of that income spectrum has been called the working class, and the upper end has been called the middle class. But that's technically the definition. Now, Sessions seems to be getting religion. Yesterday I reported that he was considering naming a special prosecutor to investigate Hillary. And he went in a committee and, in effect, pushed back on it and said, I don't have enough evidence yet to do it, but I might in the future. And, in fact, what he did was that he has directed his staff in the Justice Department to examine the Comey leaks of the memos of his meetings with Trump, the FBI email investigation of Hillary's emails, the Clinton Foundation pay-for-play schemes, and the Uranium One Deal, and has said, go through those and let me know if you recommend that we need a special prosecutor. And that's a formal request by the AG to his staff. And it wouldn't be made if he didn't think there was at least some grounds for doing it. He may not have thought it goes over the top and gives you enough grounds to do it, but it clearly is getting close. The pushback yesterday was when he told Congress, wait a minute, I don't have the results in yet, and I can't right now say there's enough basis for doing it, but I'm looking at it to see if there is. Now, in that same hearing, he revealed that there are 27 leaks under investigation by the Justice Department at the moment. Before that, last year, there were 9 open investigations. Now there are 27. And this is an integral part of the entire Mueller-Russia collaboration phony investigation. Because as you recall in my book, Rogue Spooks, we write, Eileen and I write, that after the initial argument that Trump was in cahoots with the Russians was made in the dossier, and that dossier was released through BuzzFeed right around the time Trump took office, there were immediately a series of leaks from the Justice Department and the FBI and other agencies that attested to the validity of that charge. The biggest one came from the FBI, and it said that the FBI agents had actually overheard wiretaps of conversations between Russian intelligence agents and high-ranking officials of the Trump campaign. And that leak made its way into the lead article in the New York Times and was all over the media. And it turned out that that was phony. It was false news. It was never happened. It was made up by various people in the FBI to lend credibility to this uncredible theory that Trump was in collusion with Putin to fix the election. Comey, the head of the FBI, admitted as much in testimony before the Senate 4 months later. But in the meantime, the predicate had been launched. And based on that, a special prosecutor was named, and everybody took this crazy, bizarre scandal seriously. Now Sessions is investigating where those leaks came from. And that is very important, because it'll tell us the parentage, or at least the midwifery, of the birth of these crazy allegations about Trump and Putin colluding. And that's a very important investigation, and I'm very glad that Sessions is giving it priority. As you'll recall, we have urged him to do that, and we've sent several petitions to him from you and me calling on him to do that, and I'm glad he's paying attention to that.
Dick, William Brown wants to know, Shepard Smith says Hillary had nothing to do with Uranium One. What do you say about that?
It's crazy. First, I know Shep very well. He's a good guy. I worked with him at Fox. He's from Mississippi, and he's a very liberal guy, and he sort of is dedicated to trying to live down coming from a conservative state. And Smith is just wrong. They're saying that. In fact, let me skip to that part of my presentation. The Democrats say there is no evidence that Mrs. Clinton participated in the government approval of the uranium deal, and his aides have noted that other agencies also signed off on it. It is technically true that Hillary Clinton was not physically present when the committee reviewed this sale, and it was her representative, not she herself, who voted in favor of the deal. But it could not have gone ahead without the approval of the Secretary of State, whether acting directly or through her representative. So when it said Hillary had nothing to do with it, that's just wrong. Hillary had everything to do with it. She was the head of the committee that approved it. She just didn't sit in on the session. She delegated that to her deputy. They also say that the company's actual share of American uranium production, the company that Putin took over, is only about 2%. The real benefit for Russia securing far greater supplies of uranium was from Kazakhstan, which was a deal that happened earlier also with Clinton's connivance, but it didn't undermine American security. Well, that's irrelevant. The United States only produces about 2/3 of the uranium it needs, and it has to import the rest. And what Putin did was to take over the mines that have 20% of the uranium deposits in the United States. It doesn't matter how much is being produced on Tuesday, this week. What matters is what percent of the reserves he now controls. And he now controls 20% of them. So that 2% stat is the current production, but is bogus. Other issues mentioned in the Justice Department letter, which is the letter Sessions sent asking for an investigation by his staff, include Mrs. Clinton's use of private email server, which was investigated by the FBI until the bureau director at the time, James B. Comey, declared last year that no prosecutor would press charges based on the evidence. That also is phony. What Comey said in a memorandum that he prepared 4 months before he issued that, 3 months before he issued that public statement, was that Hillary Clinton had displayed gross negligence, that's the quote, in handling of those classified emails. And gross negligence is the standard in the statute. That's the basis for a criminal prosecution. And in making that finding and using those words, he was opening the door to criminal prosecution. Then the political pressures got to bear on him, and we'll learn what those were if we get a special prosecutor to investigate this. And when he came out in July exonerating Hillary, saying no prosecutor would bring the case, he said she was guilty only of extreme carelessness, which is neither here nor there. It's not a statutory term. It's just an adjective that he invoked or invented to characterize her conduct. But it was originally gross negligence, and he walked that back. And his finding of gross negligence was before he had even interviewed Hillary or any of her staff. So there's real suspicion in how that came to be, how that came about. The letter also said that the department was examining Comey for leaking details of his conversations with Trump after the president fired him, to the extent that there may be legitimate questions about Mrs. Clinton or Mr. Comey. The credibility is undermined because of the partisan nature of the investigation. That's what the New York Times said, and that's the answer to that critique that Hillary wasn't directly involved. It's one of these. It depends on what the definition of is one of these Clinton evasions that we're used to over the years.
Cheryl McClanahan wants to know, what is your opinion about the Convention of States? I hope you have an opinion. It's going around Facebook a lot.
Well, that was what I mentioned a few minutes ago in this broadcast. No, it's fine. A Convention of the States. Now, at the moment, the Convention of the States is focused on a proposal for a mandatory balanced budget, and that's inconvenient at a time when Donald Trump is pushing for $1.5 trillion tax cut that would add to the deficit. In theory. I say in theory because it's pretty clear that the tax cut is going to stimulate revenues, which will ultimately largely pay for itself, as previous tax cuts have been able to do. But once we get past that, Convention of the States could be the vehicle for a balanced budget amendment, but more importantly, for term limits, which Congress will never impose on itself. And you'll never drain the swamp until you get term limits. Just to recount, a Convention of the States is a procedure for amending the Constitution spelled out in Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution that provides that Congress would have nothing to do with it. States would call for the convention, states would ratify the amendment. And 2/3 of the state legislatures called for a convention, they would convene it, and if 3/4 ratified its output, its amendment, it would go into the Constitution. That's the alternate way of amending it. The other way is, of course, you get 2/3 majority in Congress plus the states. But this was included by the Founding Fathers as a check against usurpation of federal power. And now there is a vigorous movement going on, led by a wonderful guy named Mark Meckler, who is one of the founders of the Tea Party movement, to convene a Convention of the States. And I believe 30 of the required 34 states have ratified that. And I think that has a very good chance of succeeding and of happening.
Darlene Meyer Rubin wants to know, what do you think of Moore's chances of winning?
Well, I think that he's probably going to lose. I think that this is going to end badly for him. I was dismayed to see Hannity kind of flip-flopping on him, maybe having his arm twisted by his sponsors threatening to withdraw from his show. But I think that this last accusation is kind of a serious one, even though Gloria Allred, the lawyer who was instrumental in bringing it, is herself has a really spotty record. But nevertheless, it's a rape story, and it's not just he touched me or I touched him or whatever. It actually was rape, and that's very dangerous and gets into new territory. So I don't know yet, and I haven't been covering it much because we're awaiting the results of it. Now, yes.
Oh, another question from Daniel Malley. I just wanted to ask, if Hillary ever got convicted, what would happen to her Secret Service detail?
Oh, I don't know.
They'd be out of a job.
Now, this highly informative Deep Six, the Deep State, in which I tell you when I don't know, is sponsored, as the others are, by the Patriot Gold Group. And gold has moved to a 3-week high against the dollar because the dollar has weakened relative to the other currencies. Now, this is not a failure of the Trump administration. It's a success of the Trump administration, because Trump says correctly that the dollar is so strong that Chinese products are underpriced in our market, and therefore China racks up this huge trade deficit. And he has been trying to weaken the dollar, which he's succeeding at. But the weaker the dollar gets, the more inflation there is, and the more the value of the dollar erodes, and the more you want to look at buying gold, which doesn't erode. As I said in previous broadcasts, there's a sea change coming in gold, because China is now paying for oil in yuan, Chinese currency, and Russia and Iran are accepting it under the condition that China will swap the yuan for gold whenever you want. And Chinese currency would be the only one in the world that's convertible into gold. And with that, a lot of people are going to be using it, and a lot of people will be asking for gold, and you'll get a big increase in the price. And it may make sense for you to look at riding that.
Peggy Lockwood asks, what has happened to the child Huma and Wiener had since he's now in prison? Ever since the child was born, no one ever sees her with it.
Yeah,
Seems
I don't
odd.
know. I don't know. It's such a shame when stuff like that happens, but, that's the price of marrying a degenerate pervert. Now, there was a warning given to Donald Trump yesterday by his senior advisors about the dangers of an EMP attack from North Korea. EMP, again, is a hydrogen bomb that explodes in the atmosphere above the United States and fries all of our electric grid in the same way that a surge of power would fry your computer unless you have a surge protector between it and the electricity source. And North Korea has overtly threatened the use of EMP. They said, quote, the H-bomb, the explosive power of which is adjustable from tens of kilotons to hundreds of kilotons, is a multifunctional thermonuclear weapon with great destructive power, which can be detonated even at high altitudes for super powerful EMP attack according to strategic goals, unquote. That's a statement from the North Korean government, in effect threatening that kind of an attack. And the results of an attack like this would be horrific. Millions of Americans would die. We would have no electricity. We would have no way to preserve our food. We would have no way to get food or medicine to people. There would be no gas. There would be no transportation. And America would just rather quickly die. And this can be prevented by hardening the grid. It costs about $5 or $6 billion, which is not much. And the utility companies are saying it's not our problem. It's the Defense Department's problem. And they're saying it's not our problem, it's the utilities' problem, and nobody's fixing it. And this call is for Trump to set up an executive commission to solve it, to go around hardening the grids and then worrying about who pays for it later, akin to the Superfund process. And that definitely should happen, and I'm encouraged that this is now moving up the national agenda.
Dick, Michelle McGrain wrote in. She wants to know, she goes, I can never watch your episodes live, but I have a burning question. The other day I saw Ed Klein.
Never watch what live?
She's not able to watch the show live. She
Okay.
watches a recorded version.
Sure.
So she asked if I would ask it for her. The other day I saw Ed Klein interviewed on Fox and Friends, and he stated that Bill and Hillary are not speaking to each other, haven't in a long time, and do not live together. Do you think there is a chance that one or the other of them will turn on the other in an attempt to save his or herself?
No. No chance in hell. The whole marriage is based on privilege, on the privilege that a husband has against the wife and vice versa. And their entire lives have been lived on the basis of that privilege, and they are equally in need of it and would never turn on each other. Let me say that Ed is very credible. The stuff he comes up with is incredible. God knows what his sources are, but it's usually right. And I think that that relationship has gone through a long progression. Back when I knew them and worked with them, in the 1970s and 80s. Hillary really, I think, loved Bill. She deeply personally loved Bill. And Bill deeply and personally loved Bill. So they had something in common. And Bill is elusive. It's hard for him to love anybody. It's hard for him to put himself out to that extent. And he's very manipulative. Hillary, on the other hand, was agog for Bill and swallowed him hook, line, and sinker. Then after the Jennifer Flowers affair, Hillary began to demand a quid pro quo in return for defending Bill. And she got real political power as a result of it, as a result of her defending him in the Jennifer Flowers case. She got the right to name the Attorney General. There would be a woman and she would decide who. To have a veto over any woman employed by the administration, which was partially to keep Bill on the reservation and partially to consolidate her power base. And she got control of healthcare policy making, which she promptly ran into the ground. Then when she defended him again in the Monica Lewinsky case, she got Bill's 100% total all-in support for the U.S. Senate seat. And the White House raised most of the money. There were state dinners that were honoring donors to Hillary's campaign for the Senate. And he cleared the field and stopped any Democrat from running against her in a New York primary, which in New York was tantamount to the election. Then I think after Monica Lewinsky, they changed. I think Hillary stopped loving Bill. I think at some level she started despising him. And Bill, I think, withdrew. And I think it's very credible that they're not, well, I think they're on speaking terms. They call each other every day, it appears. But it's mainly political advice. And it really, I think, stopped being a romantic relationship. But to those who say that it was never a romance, it was always a business deal, I know that that's not true. I could always be deceived, but I've had Hillary crying on the phone to me about Bill.
Jack Tapper wants to know, whatever happened with the Vegas shooting investigation?
Good question, Jack. You keep asking that, and you're right. Absolutely. I don't know. And it's very suspect that I don't know. And I think we're going to learn a lot, that there may be some kind of cover-up in that. I have no idea. I don't have my own investigators out there, so I'm dependent on the news stories, and there haven't been any. Now, BuzzFeed, the organ that published the dossier, was sued by one of the people in the dossier that was alleged to have hacked the Democratic Party computers. And he said, I didn't hack them. This is defamatory. And he brought a lawsuit for libel against BuzzFeed for publishing this. And BuzzFeed has now turned around and said to the federal government, did you try to verify the information in the dossier? Because you used it. You went to the FISA court and you asked for an ability to conduct surveillance on Carter Page, who you claim was a go-between between Russia and Trump. And based on that, you must have tried to verify it. And the reason they're asking that is because they're saying that if the feds did try to verify it, then BuzzFeed was just fairly commenting on something that was happening in the public sector and can't be held accountable in a libel suit. The feds have refused to answer that. They've dodged it, they've ducked it, and they will not discuss the government vetting of the dossier. And that's probably because the government, particularly the FBI and the deep state, were heavily involved in writing the dossier. And that's a parentage that they want to stay away from at this point.
Dick Del Volpe asks, with so many people involved in the Uranium One, why would only Hillary benefit financially? Could there be other benefactors we don't yet know about?
Well, I don't know that Hillary would benefit financially from the Uranium One deal per se. She didn't have any interest in the uranium. She benefited because she was bribed to okay it, to approve it. And the answer to your question is yes. There will be many other people that benefited. There was an entire FBI investigation that Mueller has kept secret, and Comey after him, that they won't release the results of, where many people were bribed to approve that deal. and we don't know who they are, and it's one of the reasons to name a special prosecutor. But there's no basis for believing that Hillary herself had skin in that game, except to the extent that her husband got a $500,000 speaking fee that he pocketed personally, and she put in her pocketbook personally to vote for this deal.
Kandi Brinson wants to know what is going on with the FBI informant that had all the information on the Uranium One sale.
We're waiting for the hearing. That'll be, I don't know when it's coming up, but we're waiting for it anxiously. Now, Judicial Watch, which I increasingly love, has now sued the state of Kentucky to clean its voter rolls, because in 48 counties in Kentucky, which is more than half the state, there are more voters than there are people. The voting rolls have more people on it than the Census Bureau says reside in that county. And there are 13 states that have anomalies like that, and Judicial Watch is suing based on that. That lawsuit is important, and don't forget this wonderful commission that President Trump set up to investigate the extent of voter fraud that's chaired by Chris Kobach, the former Secretary of State of Kansas, who's now running for governor in Kansas. And I hope that commission works its magic and that we really get a clear understanding of the extent of voter fraud in this country.
Dan Denham wrote in, I read that McConnell has threatened not to seat Judge Moore if elected. Is this true, and can he do that?
He can't not seat him, but he can expel him. There's a procedure in the Constitution where 2/3 majority of each House can expel any member of the House. And it only happened right after the Civil War, when the newly readmitted southern states elected a lot of Confederate generals and former Confederate governors, including the former Vice President of the Confederacy, Judah P. Benjamin, elected them to the Senate, and the Senate then expelled them. But it's never happened since. And in most cases where there was an expulsion, the member resigned. But it remains on the books. The game here that everybody's playing is they're trying to get rid of Moore, but they're trying to keep the seat Republican. And they're worried that if we go through to the election, that the Democrat, Jones, as I think his name, will win that seat, which would never happen in normal circumstances. Now, if Moore wins the seat and takes his office and then is expelled, a vacancy is created, and the governor of Alabama, who's a solid conservative Republican, can appoint someone to take his place. And that would be a very positive thing to do. But the danger there is that Moore could lose. The last poll has him only 6 ahead. He was 20 ahead. Then a few days ago he was 11 ahead. Now he's only 6 ahead. I don't know when the election is. The November 27th sticks in my mind, but I'm not sure. And so I don't know. But that certainly would be an option.
And Fay Roe asks, do you really think we're going to go to war with North Korea? No.
I think that North Korea is bluffing, and I think Trump is calling that bluff. And if it gets close to war, if it looks like it might be war, that's bargaining by Donald Trump. Read his book, The Art of the Deal. And I think he's playing this very, very well. But it's not going to result in a war. If Kim Jong-un wanted to commit suicide, he wouldn't necessarily take the whole nation of North Korea with him.
And Clifford Blake wants to know, are the Bushes and Clintons working together to hurt Trump?
Yes. In fact, I did a video that'll come out on Friday on my lunch alert about the Clinton and the Bush relationship. We have to realize that Hillary Clinton would never have been a candidate for president if Bush had not jumped in and saved Bill Clinton's rear. After Clinton left the White House, he had just almost pled guilty to perjury in the Paula Jones case. He'd been fined $1 million. He'd been stripped of his law license. And he was in total disrepute. And yet Bush tapped him, Bush 43, to work with Bush 41 on Katrina relief and then Haiti relief. And that, in effect, absolved Clinton of his sins and made the Clintons free to fight again another day. And bear in mind that Bush 41, George H.W., and Barbara both voted for Hillary. Laura Bush may have too. And George W. Bush said he voted for a third candidate, wasting his vote. Now, there's another story about Hillary that's really interesting. There is a terrorist, an Islamist. He's not a terrorist yet, but he certainly is an Islamist named Tariq Ramadan, like the holiday, Ramadan. And he was banned from the United States by the Bush administration in February of 2004 for his financial support of a charity that funded terrorist groups. And in January of 2010, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton overturned that ban and admitted him to the United States, approving a visa. And he's not only involved with that fund, he's the grandson of the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood, the main international terrorist organization. Now he's facing multiple charges of rape and sexual assault of minors. And it's just worth knowing that this character is in the United States, able to wreak his mayhem because Hillary Clinton opened the door and invited him back in.
Thomas Hillebrand wants to know, he has a question of the day. If they take away the nuclear trigger from Trump, who in the hell would control it? Congress? It would take them months to make a decision.
Nobody. Never be taken away. Can't be taken away. Constitution is very clear that the commander-in-chief is the president. The only way to take it away would be to impeach him or to declare him mentally unfit under the 25th Amendment, which I've talked about. None of that's going to happen. The idea that some cabinet could nullify it just is never going to happen. It can't. It's illegal. Don't worry about it.
Marietta Starr wants to know, Mr. Morris, politics are so dirty. How have you been able to keep your cool after all these years?
Well, it's also fun.
You make it fun.
It's dirty, but it's also fun, you know? So, who is the selfie of the day?
Oh, our selfie of the day is
Luis Rivera. Thank you, Luis. Luis is photographed holding a copy of Rogue Spooks, which, by the way, has sold a lot lately because people are revisiting it because it predicts so accurately what's happening now in the collusion, the illusion of collusion scandal. If you want a copy of Rogue Spooks to give to somebody over Christmas, and order it from Amazon or Barnes & Nobles, but to get a signed bookplate that you can paste into it, go to dickmorrispromos.com.
No. dickmorrispromos@gmail.com.
Excuse me. dickmorrispromos@gmail.com. DICKMORRIS. See how good I'm getting at my own name? dickmorrispromos, PROMOS, @gmail.com.
We have some for you.
And do we have a shout out or something?
Do we have a shout out? Not today.
No, not today.
You haven't had a chance to catch up.
Let me shout out to all of you. Thank you.
Yes.
I'll see you tomorrow.